Welcome to NYC Jewelry Week 2022. We're the co-founders. My name is JB Jones.
And I'm Bella Naiman.
And we're so excited to welcome you to our 2022 virtual program. And we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube page and head to our website at nycjewelryweek.com to check out all of our amazing other programs that we're doing both virtually and in person. So Bella, what is this book you're showing us?
I'm really excited for this program hosted by Beth Bernstein of her fabulous book, The Modern Guide to Antique Jewelry. Beth is going to be joined today by Ben Macklowe, Sandra Cronan, Elizabeth Doyle, and Dana Keyamour, and they will take you through jewelry history decade by decade. We highly recommend that you pick up a copy of this book, visit these gallerists when you have a chance, and just grab a notepad because you're going to want to make sure you don't miss any of the information. If you have any questions or comments for any of the participants, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll make sure that they get them. And again, here's the book. And we hope to see you all soon. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our tour through antique jewelry for New York City Jewelry Week. And I'm with some of the most esteemed antique dealers and shop owners today. I'm going to start from left to right, top to bottom. So let's start with Sandra Cronan, who's in London. And thank you for joining us, Sandra, all the way from London, 5-hour time difference. And Sandra's been in business for about 50 years, although you could never tell it. Only from her expertise. She is an expert in really all time periods, but today she will be talking about the Edwardian and early Art Deco periods. Next we go to me. I'll just do a quick thing about me. I'm the author of the book, A Modern Guide to Antique Jewelry, which is right here. All of the people that we are interviewing today have contributed to the book, their expertise and their knowledge about certain time periods. Next, I also am a journalist for Forbes and other magazines on jewelry, and a collector of antique jewelry. So let's go to Elizabeth Doyle, who's been in business for over 20 years with her sister Pam. Elizabeth also really goes to all the time periods. She has all the time periods within her collection that she sells. She, like me, she's a big lover of sentimental jewelry, which she's going to talk about today. Next, we have Ben Macklowe, who's second generation of owner of Macklowe Gallery, co-owner of Macklowe Gallery. And he is a true expert in Art Nouveau jewelry. I've never met anyone who could talk about Art Nouveau jewelry like Ben. And he also can talk about other jewelry as well. So, but really, really taught me a lot about Art Nouveau when I was doing the book. And finally, we have, and not less, that's why I said finally, we have Dana from Keyamour. And Dana had a wonderful, first she worked for Christie's, then she worked at Fred Leighton, and she owns her own company for, what is it now, Dana? How many years?
I think it's about 8 years.
8 years, and also also ranges in time period, but she really, really, really gets how the Victorian time period could be worn in a modern way today. So, which I love because I like the early Victorian time period. So I'm going to kick this off, starting with Elizabeth. We're going to go from Georgian all the way through the early 20th century, which is the Art Deco period. So I'm going to kick it off with Elizabeth Doyle, and she's going to give us a little preview about Georgian jewelry, and then talk a little bit about sentimental jewelry. As I said, one of our favorites. So Elizabeth, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so Georgian jewelry started about 1714 and ran through the early 1837, named for the 3 King Georges. It's pretty much one of the earliest time periods in jewelry that we get at the moment. It's really harder to get earlier than that. Some people specialize in medieval, but that's a little bit harder to get. So I love Georgian because it has the history, but you are still able to get it. So when my customers ask me for early jewelry, that's what we try to get for them usually. It has a very distinctive look. It's usually silver topped gold because they didn't yet have the alloy for white gold. It hadn't been discovered, and jewelers couldn't really work with platinum yet. So that came later when they developed a hotter torch. So we see old cut diamonds, rose cuts, table cuts. You do get old mine cuts, and they're usually set in silver, which gives it a dark, sort of moody feel. And people like to say it was a time period before electricity, and they liked the way the diamonds, especially rose cuts, would glisten in these candlelight balls, which is like the most beautiful, romantic sort of vision you could have. So I have with me a pair of earrings that are set with rose cuts, and they are in the silver topped gold. I don't know if they're focusing. Let me try to get a little light on them, but you could see the sparkle of the rose cuts, and you can see how the silver oxidizes and it gets that moody romantic color, but set in gold on the back, and they're always set closed back. It's before they developed the open back settings, which were then called azure, and that was a later setting style.
Can I ask a question, Elizabeth? For the closed back, they also put a foil, so this way it would have more light. Is that true? Behind the
especially rose cuts, they would, because rose cuts are flat on the back, they're only faceted on the top, so you don't get that internal dispersion. So they would generally put a foil on the back to give more brilliance. And also something that's really interesting and that people look for, collectors, sometimes on the foil they would do a domed or button back, and then the foil would be in a concave shape, and they would actually paint a black dot on the bottom of the foil, and that they do that for paste as well. It's called black dot paste, and it would give more depth to the stone. So it would make it appear like an old mine cut or something with a pavilion, but it really didn't have that. So that's especially the black dot paste is very collectible now, very niche. I mean, anyone who's not super into jewelry probably does not understand it, but for jewelry collectors, they're like, oh my God, black dot paste. So that's a really interesting thing in Georgian jewelry. Also, what we always tell people when it comes to Georgian is you need to be really respectful of the jewelry and understand it, because you cannot get it wet. If it's a closed mounting, especially with the foil back, if you get it wet, water will go into the setting and it can deteriorate the foil, and then you get a dark, and it'll just look dirty inside. So it's for people who can take care of their jewelry and be a little bit more respectful of it. So also in Georgian jewelry, you do get colored stones and you get a lot of sentimental motifs. So I also brought with me this really interesting early locket. Let me find a good background for it, because, and this one is all gold, no stones, and it's in the tri-gold with the flower motif. And I know Beth, you know a lot about flowers. It's a whole section in your book that I love. And you talk about the different symbolism in flowers. So
right, because it started really in Victorian times, where the language of flowers transferred over into jewelry. I mean, they had it in Georgian times for floral pieces, but it wasn't really until early Victorian that the language of flowers was developed. And it's a long story about how that happened, but then they would do illustrative books on certain flowers. So roses meant love, tulips, red tulips meant declaration of love, lilies of the valley meant return of happiness. There were all these beautiful ways of saying somebody's true feelings in jewelry without actually saying it, because in Georgian through Victorian times, you really couldn't express your feelings the way we can today.
Can I interject? forget-me-nots. Certainly
Yes.
not to forget. Very, very meaningful.
Right,
Yes,
and through the Georgian, all through the
and
Georgian
Victorian,
into Victorian,
Yeah, both.
and
And-
pansies. Go
And
ahead,
weren't the
Ben.
forget-me-nots also alluded to using that sort of turquoise blue color in the enamel as well as turquoise?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
not Georgian, so I didn't show it with the jewelry, but this is a little forget-me-not pin that I brought with me just to.
That's so cute.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes we have turquoise, but sometimes it's just the turquoise enamel. So this one's just turquoise enamel, but it does represent the turquoise. Yeah.
For the color, and of course there were pansies. Pansies went from Georgian into Victorian, but pansies were really because pense in French means think. It began to mean think of me or think of the giver, the person who gave the jewel to you. And so pansies are very popular with collectors in enamel as well as in genuine stones. So, and then there was a language of flowers. There was also, what else? Acrostic jewelry, Elizabeth, that we had that started in Georgian.
Yeah. Acrostics were so popular, really made popular by Napoleon and his first wife, Mary Louise. He gave her a number of acrostic pieces. I think the most famous were a set of bracelets, and they actually spelled out a message and then the dates. I think it was both of their birthdays. But acrostics, the jeweler would use a stone, and the first letter of the name of the stone would be representative of a letter, and that's what would spell out the message. So now pieces that we can find usually would say regard, ruby, emerald, garnet, amethyst, ruby, diamond. Those are fairly one of the more popular acrostics we can find. Or amour is a really beautiful one as well. And love, we can sometimes find love as well.
And dear and dearest, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that we also had snakes in that time period, which also were very, snakes had a lot of meaning, and sometimes, going way back, snakes were not one of the, beautiful meanings. They had evil, evil and good, depending on the culture and the civilization and how far back they went. But when we go from Georgian into Victorian times, the snakes meant love. And I will let Dana talk about why that is, because sometimes I have seen Dana snakes, and Dana finds the most beautiful snake jewelry, from bracelets to rings to, so why don't we let Dana talk about some snake jewelry and then go into more of the Victorian era.
Sure. So as you said, snakes, the snake imagery throughout history has been prolific. They often symbolize fertility, renewal, life, rejuvenation, that type of idea when they shed their skin, that type of idea. But I think in the Victorian era, it took a much more sentimental meaning, especially when young Queen Victoria was proposed to by her beloved Prince Albert when he gave her a snake ring. He had it. The story goes that he had it designed for her, and he put an emerald in the head, which is her birthstone, and it had a diamond and ruby eyes, I believe. And it started a trend all throughout England of snake rings being given as a token of love. The snake at that time, probably took on a more meaning of wisdom and faithfulness that Queen Victoria held on to. She, as a queen, was a very, very sentimental young woman. And I think that one of her early pieces of jewelry that was given to her by her mother was a locket that had a little piece of hair from her father. And her father had died quite young in her life. So she always, I think, collected jewelry to remind herself of people in her life. And so, of course, this ring from Prince Albert was very meaningful. She also wanted a lock of his hair that she put in a locket. And they started a trend of giving charms to each other. She collected a charm for the birth of all of her children. She had, I think, 8. And all the hair was in the charm. I obviously don't have exactly what she had, but I have an example of an era bracelet of the era that they have rock crystal hearts. And I believe she had enamel hearts that she collected quite a bit of. This rock crystal one would be fine to put a very lovely little token of a photo or even a little piece of hair for the new collector. But I think that her Queen Victoria's whole reign was could be characterized by the what was going on in her life and the type of jewelry she was wearing at the moment, the fashion that she was putting forth. And so she had a quite long reign. So after her sort of young, youthful courtship and her early life, she had her children. Unfortunately, her husband died when he was quite young. It took on a different meaning of mourning for her. So she changed her aesthetic then. But at the time, England was also progressing and changing industrially. And you have a grand period of Victorian jewelry that was much ornate, much more heavier. I have a necklace that I like to think is probably characteristic of the grand period with those garnets. It has much more feminine fringe to it. The gold loops hanging down. It's just kind of an ornate, very prosperous looking piece of jewelry that I think characterized that grand idea of Victorian jewelry.
Sorry.
Sure.
Can I interject for a second? So so we went from her earlier days, which was very romantic, and it was called she had a very long reign from 1837 to 1901. So there were actually 3 periods within her period, which was romantic, grand, and aesthetic. And the grand period encapsulated, the romantic period was obviously her love of Prince Albert, and I think her heart bracelet had different hearts for every one of her children, and she would add a heart. And the lock of hair didn't represent, like, people think locks of hair represent death, but it represents also just a memento, which she put in for her children, so she could have, like, wear part of, a piece of their hair while she was wearing the heart bracelet. But then during the grand period, it was also the archaeological revival period, as well as when people went on the grand tour to Italy and Spain and Greece and wherever, but mostly Italy. So there was a lot of gold work, as you were saying, and a lot of revivalist jewelry from Etruscan to Gothic, to a lot of and beautiful micro mosaics and different types of jewelry of that elk. People would bring back souvenirs from their travels, but I'll let you go back to that beautiful garnet piece that you're holding up. This is a beautiful necklace. But the grand period really it encompassed her mourning, because she was in mourning for 30 years when Prince Albert died.
Yes.
So there was a lot of black as well, a lot of black tracery enamel, and there was a lot of black onyx, and a lot. Yes, I know that you have these things, Dana. So. And so there was a lot of that because of mourning, and she was really she set the style more, I think, than any other royal for what was what not only England but the rest of Europe. Like the snakes became popular throughout Europe, and a lot of the motifs still to this day, like crescent moons and stars and whatever, anchors and what all the meanings behind those are still popular with designers today. They're still making jewelry that reflect back on that time period. Wouldn't you say, Dana?
Oh, 100%. She was very, I read somewhere that she wasn't necessarily a fashion icon in the sense that the way she dressed took hold all across Europe the way her jewelry did, but she kind of adopted a look that was simple, so that her she chose plainer ivory and pastel colors, but then chose jewelry that was much more bright, much more ornate, much larger, much more feminine. That actually took a hold and created movements in France and Germany and elsewhere to emulate the things that she was wearing. And as you said, during the Grand Period and people moving, traveling, taking huge tours of Europe, they would come back with, micro mosaic pieces, pieces that have images of buildings in Italy, and Castellani at that time was also a great influence with the Etruscan revival work that he revived quite literally. And so all of these things with technology advancing, gold work was able to be a little more precise. All of these things brought her the type of jewelry that she liked to a different look, finally culminating in the aesthetic period, which was literally, the idea was art for art's sake. So people were designing jewelry that was much lighter. Women were wearing and going to work a little bit more, so they were wearing smaller pieces of jewelry, smaller earrings, and so the jewelry changed again into a whole different idea. I have a pendant that I think is quite pretty for that aesthetic era, featuring, of course, the symbol of the bird, which is like a renewal or return to me, or faithfulness. Has this very pretty ornate gold work, and the granulation at the top here, accented by pearls. And this locket would open, and you could also have a memento of your loved one on the inside of the locket, whether it be a clipping of a fabric, a ribbon, hair. And I think that the Queen Victoria, at the end of her life, when she came out of mourning, and also the cultural things that are happening at the time, were all culminating into a different look of jewelry.
And it was lighter, it was more, and there was some sort of whimsy to it, and also included the hobbies where you get the horseshoe, the horseshoe, which we think of as like meaning luck, but it was
Right.
also because, people started, because she came out of mourning, people started doing more fun things, like going horseback riding and being into sports. And
Yes.
so that was part of it. And it became lighter again, kind of harking a little bit back to the Romantic period. And also
Yes.
pieces had meaning. So I think that, it was a really long period with a lot of wonderful jewelry. However, there was also the Industrial Revolution during that time, which was great. More diamonds came in during that time, but also the Industrial Revolution allowed more women to wear jewelry, but it became mass produced. And all of a sudden, there was in France sort of rebellion against this mass-produced jewelry of the Victorian era, which I'm going to kick over to Ben, because that's basically how Art Nouveau started. Am I right, Ben?
Sorry, just unmuted myself. That's a very interesting way of looking at it, Beth. I think that you're right, and there's also a counter story to it. Art Nouveau was really just a rebellious movement in general. These were people who were brought up in the fine tradition of jewelry making and understood how to work with everything that we've just seen, but really rejected the primacy of the four main gemstones of diamond, emerald, ruby, and sapphire, and especially natural pearls, so the five main gemstones. And were actually more interested in memories and dreams and reflections. with fantasy and with making jewelry that felt more like what we think of today as art jewelry than anything where you could look at it and understand immediately how much it cost and what it meant about the person. And I think this certain amount of mystery made it hard for a lot of people to access intellectually and aesthetically, and which is why it's always been a collector's style ever since the day it was made, even though in many ways it was widely disseminated, and we'll get to that. The really good jewelry was for the cognoscenti. And so if you look at a piece like this by René Lalique, what we have here is, oops, that's Dana there we go, thank you. The first of all, it's a spider mum, so we see the influence of a non-Western culture, of particularly of Japan, which had been opened by Commodore Perry just a few decades earlier, and Japanese aesthetics had started to really take over. There's picture of Claude Manet's wife, famously going around Paris in a kimono. But look at the materials of invention. Yes, it's gold and it's very finely made, but this is enamel, and then this is an opal, but it's not an opal that any opal dealer would value because it's very transparent. It doesn't have flashes of red and orange like an opal dealer would want. But for Lalique, it helped him express artistically what he wanted to, and sort of the feeling of what this flower meant to him, rather than something that was preordained. All of the language of flowers that we just discussed, with the exception of pensée, of the pansy, doesn't exist in Art Nouveau. The flowers have much more elusive, more mysterious meanings, but the double meaning of the pansy is used as well. And I think it's just so much fun because of this use of non-traditional materials. And Art Nouveau was really the first worldwide jewelry movement. We do see it to some extent in Victorian, but I see it much more, I think, in Art Nouveau because it gets a different expression in each of the countries, and sometimes even in different cities within the countries. Pforzheim versus Munich, for instance, and in the United States, Chicago versus New York. This is an example of New York sort of Art Nouveau. This is by Marcus and Company. And here again, we have opals, not terrifically valuable ones. And they didn't use green jadeite jade, which would have been terribly expensive and not really appreciated by Americans. They used chrysoprase. So again, the gold work is very fine. But here, the reference is much more to the Indian subcontinent of designs from places of the Mughal, sorry, my brain isn't working. That happens on Monday mornings. But of the Mughal Indian jewelry lovers. And so you see that sort of internationalism in all of the jewelry that's made. And sometimes they do use good materials, but most often not. Shall I continue, Beth?
Yes, but I just want to ask a question.
Please.
So you had taught me that some of the sign pieces were as rare as the unsigned pieces
Sure.
in Art Nouveau, and not all the pieces that were unsigned, like the pieces that were unsigned, or sometimes cost as much as the signed pieces, depending on materials and.
Well, it really depends on how. It's like everything else in jewelry. It just depends on how good it is, But certainly, I think in the years that I've been doing this, we've noticed that the names matter more than they did in the past. This is a piece of Louis Comfort Tiffany jewelry, lovely little piece with opal and enamel. And again, very much in keeping with what he was learning from Lalique, Tiffany, who obviously had access to the best gems in the world through his father's firm. And at this time, he was actually the president of Tiffany and Company. He chose to use an opal that is actually in the host rock. So you can see the brown matrix coming through and around it, which is, again, something that would have been greatly devalued by the jewelers. But I think that's just what makes this so much fun. I mean, look at this piece. Now, this is by a person you've never heard of by the name of Antoine Briqueteux. They're trumpets. Hold on a second. We got the reference here. They're trumpet honeysuckles. And it's all just a work of amazing enamel and gold work. But what's fascinating about it is that there's all of these opals, again with the opal, but they're stuck on the back. So they, as a brickwork pattern, then they just peek through in the front ever so slightly. And so here they're almost saying that the gemstones don't even matter, which is just, I think, wonderfully devious and subversive. And there's a very subversive side to this, even in the things that are used. If I can use the presentation now, I'm going to present something and show you guys. So there's sort of like two worlds of Art Nouveau, right? There's the greatly disseminated pieces. This is René Lalique. It's two naiads, and it was made with glass and brass. So this is something that even today could be bought in the, maybe $6,000 or $7,000, $8,000, and at the time was obviously made to be more affordable. But Lalique was also doing things like this as well. And here we have anemones. And this is actually what I think is so fascinating, and actually refers to what Liz and Dana were talking about, is that here Lalique is creating his own language of flowers. A wood anemone, without getting too lengthy in it, is actually an allegory for young love, particularly in the town of Aix-sur-Marne, which is where Lalique grew up. And so if you look carefully at this picture, you'll see that there's the anemone that's on, well, I guess stage left, is sort of turning away from the anemones on stage right, and in between them is a leaf of Plicajor enamel. So this was the first of 4 studies of the wood anemone that Lalique did, and this was called le rejet de l'amour, which means the rejection of love. So basically, there's a young man who's trying to court a young woman, and she's saying, "Stay away. I'm not sure what I want to do with you." But again, if you didn't know that, you would just say, "Oh, this is a pretty piece of jewelry with enamel and glass and aquamarines." And so there was a certain pleasure in being one of the initiates of this. Same with wearing something like this by Lalique, where it's 2 dragonflies being worn around the neck. And so there's this constant tension because, again, we see peacocks being used, a reference again to India and Persia. But I think this is probably the most amazing piece we've owned. This is made of wood. And sometimes I give a lecture called Art Nouveau, a jewel in every medium, because these artists were not constrained by, again, what was considered jewelry materials. So Lalique carved this out of wood, and it's a woman's body with her hair just in a profusion. And I just think it's extraordinary. It's something that we had very recently. And then this is a piece we sold to the Lalique Museum, which again was exciting to them because of its use of color. It's a very unusual color story. So we see these things over and over again in Lalique. This is these are 2 night moths. And this piece, just to help you understand, was about 8 inches across. So this was really not meant to be worn. It was really meant to be appreciated. And now it's in a private collection. But the night moths are actually an allusion to the woman's labia majora. So it was very well known that Lalique had this wonderfully sexual side to him. And so sometimes he would use an insect that would have that meaning. So that's what this is. And so it's actually very much about something that's charged with eroticism, but it's not tawdry, because you actually have to know what it is you're looking at. And I think that's just fantastic. And this is another motif that you see in Art Nouveau, something that's really joli laid, the idea that something can be beautiful and ugly at the same time. So this is a ring to be worn on the finger, but it's a bat. And blue enamel and a little sapphire of no particular value. But again, this is Lalique. And I'm talking about him because the things are just so good. It really shows you how great Art Nouveau could be at its best. But he also made things like this, which refers back to the glass. It's little grasshoppers in there. And this is something he did as what we would call a diffusion line, when he wanted people to be able to afford what he did, because he knew that even when he was making the things, they were horribly expensive. And so this is jewelry that they made starting in the 19-teens and through the 20s and 30s that were more accessible to people because it was molded glass.
So Ben, I just want to talk a little bit. Enamel is really back in fine jewelry and modern jewelry, and the Art Nouveau jewelers did an amazing work with enamel. And you had talked about once before about how they use not just one form of enamel, but sometimes 2 or 3 forms of enamel in one piece.
Sure.
And so there was that, and just the rebellious nature of using all of these different stones that weren't really meant for fine jewelry, silver and gold. They used a lot of moonstones and the opals that weren't the best opals,
Yeah.
But the enamel thing really was important in the Art Nouveau time period. So if you could just like mention the types of enamel that were used.
Well, let's take a look at this bad boy. So this is Henri Dubray, and it's 3 butterflies, as you can see, and it uses both translucent and hard enamel. It's a little hard to tell, but the idea again of enamel, since enamel is basically vitrified powders, it's basically glass, is that it would give them the opportunity to paint with instead of using gemstones, but to paint with color and to give you a sense of depth. And so we see that here. We see that with the lalique that I pointed out. And you'll even see it on a gemstone ring like this one by Marcus, where the enamel is on the side and then it comes around to the front. And these are 2 peridot, again, not an expensive stone. But the enamel even goes around to the back. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's a diamond right here in the center of the back, which is absolutely crazy because, of course, it can't be sized then, and enamel all the way around. And so I think there was just this feeling that they were making things that were so far beyond what the other jewelers could have imagined that they were willing to be very adventurous. But do understand that there were lots of people who hated Art Nouveau jewelry in 1900. Thought it was terrible. I mean, Louis Cartier never engaged. You'll never see a piece of Art Nouveau Cartier. They just refused to engage. There was not what they felt their clients wanted, and there's still lots of people today who would much rather get a big diamond than a great piece of lalique.
So that brings us into our next, because there was some crossover time period. So basically, Art Nouveau crossed over the end of the Victorian period and also the Edwardian Belle Epoque, the beginning of the Edwardian Belle Epoque period, which Sandra is going to talk about. And I'm going to kick this over to Sandra now because it was very, very different. But I would like to mention that all of antique jewelry up until the Art Nouveau period and even afterwards had so much meaning and so much magic and character to it. And if you didn't know exactly what this flower meant, or in Victorian times, or what the flowers meant to lalique, you just thought these were pretty pieces. And but as you get educated, if you are a collector, it's really wonderful because you start to learn the true meaning, which adds to the magic of antique jewelry. Wouldn't you all say? As
Yes.
antique jewelers? Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Very much
Sandra.
Right. Well, I'm going to start with something that literally is the very, very late 1890s. It's by Boucheron, Paris, and it's using a Mogul emerald, and it was obviously an emerald bead that Boucheron sliced in half, and then they used it for the basket of flowers. So you have all these wonderful, emeralds, rubies, colored diamonds, literally all the tiny gemstone flowers. And also what's extraordinary and very, very not considered to the cost in any way. He's taken a diamond, 3 briolette diamonds, which are the drops at the bottom. And to get a diamond and take a sliver out of it, the diamond would have to have been, imagined, I mean, not absolutely round, but it could have been a long stone that they cut just a sliver out of and fastened it. And they're called briolettes. And to have a briolette as long as this one at the bottom is totally outrageous. And then the side ones as well. So this was something that was made in Paris, and I think celebrating the use of a Mogul emerald stone and then all the flowers around it. And that's really an exceptionally rare and fine piece of jewelry. And then you go into the classic Edwardian, which is really from, the early 1900s. This is probably 1910. And it's a sapphire and diamond basket, again, with flowers and a natural pearl at the bottom, which is very typical of the Edwardian. They used many pearl drops. Pearls were very, very fashionable, very much in vogue. And again, going in that period, you had also things like this, and I'm talking about this using examples because it's visually much easier to look at things sometimes as an example. And that's a yellow diamond, a cushion cut yellow diamond, which would have been from the late 19th century, and it was remounted in the literally 1910 as a pendant. And beautiful old cushion cut and a natural color in yellow, golden yellow. And then I have one watch which we have been waiting to get back, and it came back today from the watchmaker. This is by, and it's probably again 1910, and it's by Malin. Malin was a very good watchmaker, did a lot with Patek Philippe. I'm not absolutely sure in which capacity, but they worked closely together. They knew one another. And this is frosted rock crystal. And I think I'll have to send you a photo afterwards, because to see the detail of the onyx and diamond all surrounding this wonderful frosted rock crystal bezel, and even on the sides, which I'm afraid is not going to be visible, is another zigzag of onyx and diamond. I mean, to have it all where you wouldn't even see it. The Edwardians were very subtle. Again, a bit like the Art Nouveau, it was for the wearer, the collector, not for the person that actually was looking at it. Although if you looked at someone wearing this, you would be rather impressed. I mean, it's as exquisite as a watch of that period can be. And then we've also got a pair of lovely pearl and diamond. Pearls were very much the thing in that period, but pearl and diamond earrings with the drop natural pearls and diamonds. But again, this quality. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So would you say, I want to start off, just explain a little to our viewers about Edwardian Belle Epoque. When the movement first started and we moved over to that,
Yes.
it was very white on white. So you had the diamonds and the white and the pearls, right? And then it
Yes.
moved into more colors. You had rubies and emeralds, and as the time, it was a very short time period.
It was a very short time period. Platinum itself was only really brought into use in the late 1890s, and only by a very few people. Tiffany used it, but they didn't really even refer to it. It didn't have a name that it was platinum. But in 1902, 1903, they started then to find that they had platinum. They discovered how to alloy it and use it. And then you'd have that mounted with the diamonds, and it gave everything a very, very white look. So your pearls and diamonds really had a wonderful look of white and beauty and purity. And pearls couldn't have been more popular then. So really, your Edwardian period was all about that, and the Belle Epoque, which is the French word for Edwardian. So really, Edwardian being English, Belle Epoque being French. So one should really refer to Belle Epoque only of French jewels, but I'm afraid everything now is sort of slightly crossed over, and one says Belle Epoque, referring to the swags and the lovely things. But technically, you really are talking about probably 1910. It started to really become, I mean, one sometimes says early Art Deco, but you wouldn't really refer to that till about 1915. And really then Deco really was, 1920. So you have a slight gap where you have crossovers and you have the influence of one and then going into the other. And then you had Tutti Frutti, which was Carmen Miranda and Tutti Frutti, which became a mad craze in the 20s. And that's by Mauboussin, with old Mughal carved emeralds and rubies, which would have come from the Maharaja's jewels in India. And they were remounted by many jewelers in Paris, Mauboussin, Cartier, Van Cleef. They all did wonderful Tutti Frutti, in fact. And this is a pair of double clips by Mauboussin, which are actually quite lovely, I must say. double clips were very, very popular. You'd wear one on either side of a neckline, and literally you'd pull it back like that and clip it, and it would be a very big fashion. And that was probably about 1930. And you see a lot of the film stars wearing wonderful double clips. We have a Cartier one here, which can be worn as one brooch when it's together. But and it's escalator clips, because they actually, if you look at it in profile, it literally is like an escalator, and with the tourmaline set into the side, stepped up. So that comes apart, and you have two double clips with the central brooch like that. So you have the clips worn on either side of anything, on a sweater. But now they're coming very much back into fashion. People are saying, you know, brooches are actually terribly chic, and we have many men wearing brooches in double clips. I mean, Elton John did a marvelous job putting it back on the map, but he did it many years ago. So we're just catching up. And then I have one. Sorry, Beth.
So, but because you're showing us two different styles, I just want to
Yes.
talk to our viewers again. So basically, when we get into the Art Deco period, the Deco period, there was that very geometric, which you were just showing us, like that elevator, very geometric, based on skyscrapers and all the new
buildings in New York.
Right.
Yes.
So you had that, and then from that grew into the tutti frutti, where there were the carved gems, and you had then different cultures coming in and influencing the Art Deco. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, absolutely right. So yes, that's very much in the order, much more in the order of how it worked. And yes, the architectural style with all the buildings influencing the geometry of everything in the Art Deco period. It really did. A lot of it replicates or is reminiscent of the architecture in the buildings. You think of the Empire State Building and all the wonderful Odeon aspects of it. And you can look at this ring, which is Cartier, and you can really see the extreme style and the influence. And that, which is coral and diamonds, is a very rare example. Came from a collection we were very happy to acquire. So that's an exceptional example of Cartier and late Deco, but still that geometry and the influence. And I can show you another lovely example of geometry and Deco, which is the aqua bracelet, which has odd triangles, which is something unusual. And they were able to just take any shape that made them feel inspired and have it cut and then use it in any way. I mean, Yard did wonderful things. This could easily be a Yard bracelet. It's not signed, but it's still the quality and wonderful with the different shaped aquas. And then a classic, rather sumptuous line bracelet with about 20 carats of diamonds, again from 1930, but just using beautiful quality stones, absolutely matched in color perfectly. So there are no gaps.
So are those French cut?
They're not. We have a smaller one that's French cut, and it wouldn't have been visible, so I didn't bring it. But they're just absolute emerald cuts. But
they're beautiful. It's a beautiful.
And then one other one, which is the sapphire and diamond bracelet, and I mean, again, very geometric, very Deco, with nice Burmese sapphires and all interesting cuts of diamonds. But again, that's 1930, 1925, probably.
Well, it actually looks as modern today as it did when it was designed.
It's timeless.
Yeah, it's really
timeless. Good jewelry is timeless.
Definitely. I have a few questions for each of you, if you don't mind. I want to ask Dana a question first. I want to ask Dana, as a new starting collector, how can you tell if something's authentic or not? I know this is a big question. I just want you to, give me a smaller answer, I guess, like, your starting points of knowing if something's authentic or not, besides going to one of you who are trustworthy jewelers.
I think there are, I always look at gold, what the item was made in. So we've already talked about how platinum was not available until the late 1890s through to the early 20th century, obviously. So if someone is showing you something that's supposed to be Georgian and it's got platinum or even white gold, it's a telltale sign that that's not something that's going to be authentic from the period. I also have people look at the way things are set. In the Georgian period, the closed back is kind of a little bit of a shortcut. So if you see something that's very, very machine made looking and open back, it's probably not Georgian from the period. I think that you want to look at the way that the stones are cut. I know, many gemologists and jewelers can more precisely tell you exactly why the stone wasn't cut in that time frame. But even a starting out collector might also be able to discern that the stone might be modern or might have been added or replaced later. So those are all things that you can look for when you're looking at something and trying to discern if it's authentic or not.
Thank you, Dana. So my next question is for Elizabeth. Why do you think sentimental jewelry is so popular today?
Well, I think sentimental, even jewelry is such a popular gift item. Everybody loves receiving a beautiful jewel for a special occasion. And I think not just beautiful, but when it has the background, the history of the sentiment behind it, it's sort of the next level. So, when your significant other gives you a beautiful, like, say, a heart locket, like my husband gave me this beautiful one, so the heart obviously symbolizes love. It makes it that much more meaningful. And for me, like this one, ruby's my favorite stone. Opal is my daughter's birthstone. So it has layers of meaning. It makes it that much more special. And also, like we've touched upon throughout this conversation, sometimes the meanings are even sort of hidden. So it's not so surface level. It could be something that's a little secret between the two of you. Like if there is a favorite flower or the flower that has a sentiment like the pansy, to give something that has a special meaning between the two people it makes it a more special, more meaningful, more thoughtful gift. So I would say it resonates as much now as it ever did.
Thank you. And for Ben, well, Sandra, let me go to you first, and we'll end with Ben. What I've noticed also that sometimes it's very cyclical. What how, just like in modern jewelry, it's cyclical. Sometimes Georgian jewelry is like majorly popular, and sometimes not. So what makes, but Art Nouveau, not Art Nouveau, Art Deco is always, seems to always have some sort of popularity among collectors. And why do you think that is?
Yes, you're right, Beth. You're absolutely right. I think because it's probably one of the most commonly used descriptions or periods, Art Deco. And there's so many people that don't know a massive amount about jewelry, antique jewelry, but they all have heard of Art Deco. And then you get Cartier, Van Cleef, Mauboussin, Tiffany, all the great names. And I'm afraid just from having heard about it, more than anything else, it is widely known and it is just terribly popular. But I think collectors need to go to what appeals to them. I think it's so important that a collector has to look at what is out there and not buy it for anything other than a passion and you're drawn to it.
And I'm going to thank you, Sandra. I'm going to go to Ben and ask him a question I've asked him before. I have always found it hard to wear, except for the brooches. I found, because I love brooches. I found Art Nouveau harder to wear than other jewelry. Can we just talk about how to make that modern?
Well, it's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, look, Louis Cartier famously quipped, "We make jewelry for women."
I'm going to get up for a second, sorry, because my low battery is about to die, and I have to plug in. So while Ben's talking, I'll be right back.
Okay. As I said, Louis Cartier famously quipped, "We make jewelry for women who wear clothing." And I think that all of us in the industry know that how women's fashion and style affects what they want to wear. And although I agree with Sandra that Art Deco is eternally popular, I've actually found that in the last 10 years with women dressing very casually, that it's been a much harder style to sell than it had ever been in the past. Now, Art Nouveau has always been hard to sell. It flies in the face of so much of what is considered good taste. And so you've already got, it's already what we would call a considered purchase. But there are things, I mean, this is a ring by René Lalique that's in my personal collection. You can't see, unfortunately, but it's two dancing women. It's sort of ecstatic and wonderful. And these are René Lalique cufflinks, which are things that are not hard to wear. So there's a lot that can be done. But if you look at the way women dressed who really believed in the Art Nouveau period, they were, most of them, still wearing a corset. They had very long hair that covered their ears, so you don't see any earrings of the Art Nouveau style. You'll see lots of hair combs and diadems and chokers and brooches, as you said. You also see pendant necklaces. So some of the more, inexpensive Art Nouveau jewelry really did address that. If you look, there's a lot of German jewelry made in silver, where you see lots of pendants that are, at least in form, are more what one would consider jewelry rather than artistic jewelry. And I think that that's probably part of it. And look, my mother, who started our jewelry business, always bought her clothing to go with her jewelry. So when she bought a piece of art, the first thing she would be to go out and figure out how she was going to wear it. And that made it fun. I think that, we live in this sort of era now where everybody expects their jewelry to just be another accessory. And Art Nouveau, again, says, no, this is actually opinionated jewelry for an opinionated woman who's very proud of who she is and is willing to put that out there. So I don't find that it's actually that it's hard to wear. It's just you need to be mindful about it and very intentional.
Thank you, Ben. So I want everyone to pick. I have in the book, which I'm going to just show again because this was a book I wrote that all of you are featured in, The Modern Guide to Antique Jewelry. I'm just going to have to plug it a little bit because it, was really true to my heart. And all of you did such a wonderful job being quoted in the book and working with me. Thank you. But I also had 10 essential jewels at the back of the book of what I thought every collector should have. And my favorite essential jewel that I would want in my collection, I have one in paste, in black dot paste, but I would want a diamond Georgian Riviere in my collection. So I want everyone to go around and say, what is your favorite piece, or what piece you think a collector should have in their collection from any time period? Sandra?
Well, I think my favorite piece is an Edwardian pearl and diamond bracelet. Now, this one is one, but I actually have three. And I'm afraid it's something that I literally do live in. The other one has pave diamond balls and then real pearls, quite large, and probably about 10 of each. And it is fabulous. Cost me a fortune, but it is one of my favorite pieces of jewelry, never to sell.
And Ben?
I'm sorry. When I was trying to get your book up here, which it's coming to right now, so that would be great, Monica. So I wanted to look and see which were the 10 essentials that you were talking about, so I didn't make a mistake. Are you asking in general what I think are an essential piece of jewelry for a woman?
In general, like it doesn't have to be from the book.
Oh, okay, because the book is so fantastic. I wanted to give it a plug. You should buy this book if you're watching this lecture. Why don't you come back to me?
Okay.
Why don't you go to Elizabeth and Dana?
Okay, Dana, what do you think is an essential jewel for a collector?
I have to go with a pair of Victorian earrings, in the sense that they often have length, they often have movement, they have volume. And I think it really translates into today's style where women are wearing longer earrings and earrings that will show up. And it's in a price point that's still pretty accessible to many. So I think, and there's so many styles and variations that you can choose from. And I think it's a great piece for a collector to have in their jewelry box that you can be worn casually during the day. It can be dressed up during the night. And it's a great starting point.
And also, aren't the Victorian earrings, even though they're long, tend to be lighter?
They tend to be lighter, yes.
So
Yeah, with the repoussé work and everything. Yes, absolutely. So it's not cumbersome.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Okay, Elizabeth, what do you think somebody should have in their jewelry collection?
So for me, I think a great pair of silver top diamond earrings. So like the ones that I showed, the Georgian ones, or I have these that are dropping. But these are also silver top diamonds, but they have opals in the center, which are. But the reason I like silver top diamond earrings is because I think the darkness makes them a little modern and edgy. So especially for my clients, a lot of whom are like, a little bit more creative types. I mean, it runs a gamut, but a lot of people start out a little bit on the younger side and run all the way up in age. But I think a silver topped pair of diamond earrings sort of work at any age and can be very modern and edgy with like a white tank top, jeans, and like heels. You could wear them out to a bar. You could, wear them to a concert. But then they could be very dressy when you go to a more elegant, mature venue. So I love the versatility of them. They don't normally scream like uber practical, but I actually think they are. So I think they're a great jewelry staple.
Okay, Ben, are you ready?
All right, I'm ready. Well, it's interesting because when you asked the question, I realized, since I'm the only guy here, I'm really not the one wearing the jewelry. I'm the one looking at the jewelry. And so I come from it from a slightly different perspective. I completely agree with Dana and Elizabeth. A great pair of earrings is just the easiest thing to point at. And I understand it because I've given Hillary, my wife, 25 pair of earrings. But actually, I was looking at her jewelry box this morning, and I'd like to offer a counter example, which is I actually think that the jewelry that women should be collecting are actually rings, because there's an absolutely limitless supply, and there's also so many variations on what they could be, and you can stack them on your fingers. And unlike earrings, you get to look at them yourself. And I think that there's this whole thing about jewelry about who's being observed and who's the object and who's the, and so for a woman to wear earrings is great. It's, look at me, here's my face. I get it, the whole Instagram world we're living in. But to wear rings is really like, this is for me. And I remember I was on a flight with Hillary once. We were going to a very fancy party, and she was wearing, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 rings across different fingers in different styles, Georgian, Victorian, Art Nouveau. I mean, just she looked incredible. And the light was coming in from the window of the plane and making all of them bounce, and there was like rainbows above our head. And I don't know, for me, I think that's what a woman should focus on, because then they become very personal things, and you can give them to yourself. Because we always think of a ring as like, an engagement ring and a wedding ring, and there's something very nice about that. But let's be honest, it's kind of boring. But rings that a woman buys for herself is part of her journey. So that's why obviously you all agree. So to me, that's really special.
We're all wearing, so you hit it right on it. So that's why, like, I've collected so many rings throughout my 25 years of collecting that Georgian Riviere is just calling to me, because I feel like it's like that that classic piece that you can wear and then layer, graduate, with a beautiful French chain, filigree chain or something else. But it's like that beautiful point where you can wear that with the t-shirt and jeans or white shirt or out, with a black, cocktail dress or any color cocktail dress or gown. Not that I'm going out in a gown anytime soon, but it's like always been a piece that I coveted. So anyway, I think that we all talked about like this in a modern perspective where we can wear antique jewelry today and feel as modern as when they wore them back then with our clothes today. And personally, what Ben was saying about his mom, I always dress for the jewelry. I always wear very basic kind of clothing and let the jewelry pop because to me, clothes are a backdrop for jewelry. And I was once a fashion stylist and wardrobe stylist, and I still think clothes are a backdrop for jewelry. So.
Yes, most definitely.
So does anybody have anything to add? If not, should we all say, well, Ben has something to add.
For anybody who's watching this, don't be discouraged by your pocketbook. My mom and dad started with $150. There's amazing things that can be bought at every price range. You just have to be intrepid. And the great thing about jewelry is when you outgrow it, you can sell it right back into the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So that's something I think is really important. Get started.
That's a wonderful point, Ben. A really, really wonderful point. I remember when I started collecting, when I was much younger, I bought smaller Victorian pieces that were more affordable, and then my taste started to change, and I started collecting better pieces, and I'd sell the Victorian pieces back into the market, as Ben was saying, because they were still nice pieces, but they were much less expensive than, let's say, a Georgian ring. A Victorian ring was much less expensive than a Georgian ring, and I started liking Georgian rings that you couldn't wear to wash your hands. So, so now they sit in the safety deposit box while I'm washing my hands constantly since the pandemic. But anyway,
I think people should buy what speaks to them as well. Don't be afraid. If you think it's beautiful and you think you're going to wear it, I think that there shouldn't be so much pressure put on it to be, exactly correct or something that's going to be a collector's item for hundreds of years to come. I think the women and men should look at jewelry and enjoy it and buy what they feel like they'd wear.
Amen.
Yes, I agree.
So
this was great, Beth. Thank you.
Find a dealer that you feel very comfortable with and you trust, and seek out and take their advice. I think that's something that's terribly important. I'm not an advocate of buying at auction because I don't feel that they're going to be giving you great advice. Find a person, a dealer, an individual, and take their advice if you have an empathy with them. And that's the best way to start collecting.
I agree too. And that's why all of you are in my book, and that's why all of you are here too, because you're all trustworthy dealers that I have met in my collecting days along the way. Everyone's sharing my book. That's very nice. Okay, well, I'm so glad you were here to join. And please, our viewers, go out and buy a piece of antique jewelry. Go on your little tour of the different centuries. Find what works for you and buy a piece of jewelry. Don't you all agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Become
Thanks, Beth.
Okay, well, it's nice seeing you all, and hope to see you all again in person soon. Hope that the viewers got some information that they can use when they're out finding their piece of their first piece or one of their pieces of jewelry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beth.
Bye-bye.
Bye.